The humid Milwaukee air hung heavy with the stench of decay as Tracy Edwards, gasping for breath, stumbled into the night. His eyes darted around frantically, a mix of terror and adrenaline pumping through his veins. He had just escaped the clutches of a monster, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. Edwards, shaken but alive, flagged down a passing police car. His story, a terrifying cocktail of druggings, threats, and a blood-chilling collection of Polaroids. The officers, skeptical yet intrigued, accompanied Edwards back to the apartment. The stench intensified as they entered. The air was thick with the odor of decay. What they discovered inside apartment 213 would forever etch itself onto their souls. A nightstand drawer held a gruesome collection, Polaroids of dismembered bodies. The officers, hardened by years on the force, recoiled in horror. The photographs depicted a level of depravity that defied comprehension. The macabre tableau continued into the kitchen. A refrigerator held a human head, preserved like a grotesque hunting trophy. A stockpot on the stove hinted at an even more sinister culinary practice. The apartment wasn't just a residence, it was a charnel house, a monument to one man's insatiable bloodlust. Dahmer, who had calmly observed the unfolding scene, was apprehended on the spot. His arrest marked the end of a reign of terror that had gripped Milwaukee for over a decade. But for the families of the 17 victims, the nightmare had just begun. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His childhood, outwardly ordinary, masked the genesis of a monster. A quiet, withdrawn child, Jeffrey displayed an unsettling fascination with death from a young age. He would collect roadkill, meticulously dissecting the remains with a morbid curiosity that belied his tender years. His parents, Lionel and Joyce, were caught in a tumultuous marriage, their constant arguments casting a pall over the household. As Jeffrey grew older, his fascination with death morphed into something more sinister. He began fantasizing about control, about the power of life and death. His teenage years were marked by increasing isolation and a burgeoning addiction to alcohol. He felt increasingly alienated from his peers, his only solace found in the macabre world he constructed in his mind. A pivotal moment occurred when Jeffrey was 14. Witnessing a neighbor dissecting roadkill ignited a dark spark within him. He was captivated by the process, by the way the body could be manipulated and controlled even in death. This event, seemingly insignificant, would have terrifying repercussions. The summer of 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer, fresh out of high school, found himself alone. His parents, finally succumbing to the years of acrimony, had divorced. It was during this time, adrift and consumed by his dark fantasies, that Jeffrey Dahmer crossed the line from morbid curiosity to cold-blooded murder. His first victim was Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker lured to Dahmer's grandmother's house with the promise of alcohol and companionship. Dahmer, fueled by alcohol and his own twisted desires, bludgeoned Hicks to death. The act, brutal and premeditated, unleashed a darkness within him that would never be contained. In the aftermath of the murder, a sense of panic and exhilaration washed over Dahmer. He dismembered Hicks's body, scattering the remains in the woods surrounding his grandmother's house. The act of dismemberment, far from repulsing him, seemed to solidify his dark desires, binding him to the act in a way he hadn't anticipated. Years passed. Dahmer, discharged from the army, drifted from one dead-end job to another, all the while honing his gruesome craft. He continued to kill, each murder a grotesque reflection of his escalating depravity. His victims, almost all young men of color, were lured to his apartment with promises of money, drugs, or companionship. Once inside, they were drugged, tortured, and ultimately killed. Dahmer's methods became increasingly sadistic. He experimented with ways to exert ultimate control over his victims, even attempting crude forms of lobotomies in a desperate and twisted attempt to create living zombies, subservient to his every whim. In a chilling near miss, 14-year-old Conorak Synthesomphone managed to escape Dahmer's clutches in May 1991. Found wandering the streets, naked and disoriented, he became a pawn in a series of horrifyingly inept decisions made by authorities. Despite pleas from concerned neighbors who insisted the boy was in danger, police returned Synthesomphone to Dahmer.